That was one of the most confusing, boring, but also weirdly nerve-wracking races that I've watched in a while. The mandatory two-stop was expected to make the Monaco Grand Prix more exciting, add an extra element of variability to F1's annual procession. But all it did was cause teams to come up with some unethical tactics like holding up half the grid, which meant the leaders would keep lapping them. For example, Kimi Antonelli finished the race 3 laps down. The last time that happened was the 2021 Mexican Grand Prix with none other than Nikita Mazepin. Some drivers would also stay out hoping for a safety car or red flag, which never came, because everyone is driving so unnecessarily slowly that it's nearly impossible to crash. So then, it just becomes one massive standoff until someone stops on track or there's a crash, just waiting for some opportunity for things to be shaken up, like any other race. Now, I can appreciate them trying something different. The 2024 race was a genuine snooze fest, and the only thing that made it memorable was Leclerc winning. However, Monaco just cannot be saved, especially since these new cars are way too large to be racing there. I personally blame the regulations more than the track itself because it's hard enough to overtake with dirty air, let alone the streets of Monaco. This two-stop idea wasn't necessarily bad, it just backfired due to teams exploiting loopholes. But now, we're at the point where drivers are coming up with suggestions that literally turn F1 into Mario Kart. And speaking of, F2 was actually the craziest gimmick I've ever seen. Also, can I just say, what are F1 actually planning with this advertising? Every time the cars went through the tunnel, I was like, is this a teaser for a Mickey Mouse collab? Or a race in Disneyland? Whatever man, let's just keep it pushing. Now it's time to talk about the hometown hero. The man attempting to defend his crown at this circuit. Heading into the weekend, he wasn't too optimistic about his chances for a second win around the streets of Monaco. So much so that he liked this Instagram post of him jumping off a cliff. And the BS started immediately, when Stroll attempted to bring back Le Curse of Leclerc by taking out his front wing 8 minutes into FP1. But all that did was fire up Charles even more. Fastest in first practice, fastest in second practice, fastest in third practice. But since McLaren, and especially Red Bull, normally sandbag quite a lot, I wasn't going to be fooled into false hope. And then you've got the Leclerc factor around Monaco. This guy knows the track so well, he could probably do a lap with his eyes closed. Track evolution throughout the weekend was crazy. In addition, the drivers setting continuous laps helped them to build confidence, which is literally everything at this track. As a result, lap times kept dropping very fast, and qualifying was no different. Charles was locked in from the word go, fastest in Q1, and only 11 hundredths between him and Norris in Q2. Going into Q3, it was looking like a straight shootout between those two for pole. McLaren head out for their first set of runs early, looking to lay down a marker. Piastri crosses the line with a 1:10.1, and Norris then goes 15 thousandths faster. Both McLarens set the bar extremely high, completely out of reach for every other driver on the grid. Except Charles Leclerc. The Monegasque left every last drop of performance out there on the track, taking provisional pole as the clock ran down to 0. Verstappen couldn't get anywhere close. Piastri didn't have an answer. The only driver who could do anything about it now was Lando Norris. After initially setting a seemingly untouchable banker lap, he then went for it again on the same set of tyres. And unfortunately for the home crowd, the Tifosi, and me, he absolutely nailed it, snatching pole right back at the last second. Last over the line, clear by over a tenth of a second. As much as it hurt, I gotta admit, that was ice cold from Lando, setting the lap record in the process and becoming the first driver ever to set a sub 70 second lap around Monaco. That was very impressive. Charles was obviously fuming. Had Ferrari sent their drivers out as early as McLaren did and given them the opportunity to do 2 flying laps, maybe Leclerc would have found more time. But considering the SF25 didn't make it to Q3 in Imola, to be fighting the McLarens for pole was a nice change, even if he just missed out. As for Lewis, he was out here literally levitating in free practice. Like, this is not what we meant by flying lap punk. He also got caught out with traffic in FP3, which caused him to crash. Crazy how the media still blamed him, even though it wasn't his fault. But in qualifying, he was actually quite decent, putting the car in P4 and 3 tenths off Leclerc. Not bad, considering how much of a beast Leclerc is at this track. But unfortunately, the FIA gave him a 3-place grid penalty for impeding Max in Q1. To me, I thought it was harsh, considering A, it was his race engineer's fault for telling him Verstappen was not on a push lap when he very clearly was, and B, both drivers made it through to the next round. But having said that, it doesn't matter what the circumstances were, only the action does. If the stewards penalised based on the outcome of the action and not the action itself, then things would be way messier. So this was unfortunately a slam dunk, especially since it's Lewis. The FIA are always going to bring the hammer down. But Ricky, please tighten up, man. Man's cost his driver 3 places because of some lousy miscommunication. just like in Australia, when he cost Lewis a potential podium because he didn't tell him that it was going to rain. During the race, Leclerc did everything he could to challenge Norris, but sadly, there was no way through. However, this was the most he could have done given the circumstances. He has easily been one of the best drivers this season, but hasn't been in the spotlight too much. And given how poor the Ferrari has been in low-speed corners so far, Charles expected much less than a P2. So it was a nice surprise. But they still need to implement fixes pretty quickly if they want to consistently challenge McLaren and Red Bull, because it's so frustrating to watch Leclerc's talent get wasted. And same with Lewis. I really thought he was going to get bottled up behind Alonso like in 2022, but he managed to jump him and Hadjar during the pit stop phases. However, after that, he spent the rest of his time in no man's land. The drivers behind were too slow to keep up, and the drivers ahead were too far to catch. There was a point where he was closing in on Max, but then he lost like 10 to 15 seconds navigating traffic. His race engineer was also just not there. He went to sleep for like 30 laps. Then when Lewis asked, "How far behind am I?" Ricky replied with something completely unrelated. Now, to be fair to him, Adami does provide great performance feedback on how Lewis can extract more from the car. But way too often now has there been miscommunication issues for it to be just called teething issues. It feels like there's a fundamental problem, either a language or cultural barrier. But something has to change. Whether it will though, is a different story entirely. This is the same race engineer who during the 2020 Spanish Grand Prix, Sebastian Vettel literally had to give him and the team instructions on what to do with strategy. Maybe he just needs to go completely. Maybe Ferrari needs to improve their systems and processes. Maybe they need to do both. I don't know what needs to happen, but Lewis's weekend was compromised by the faults of his own team. For the championship, this was an important race weekend for Lando Norris. He's been struggling a lot this year on a Saturday. In Bahrain, he couldn't get a lap together in Q3. In Jeddah, he overcooked it. And generally, he's just been lagging behind his teammate quite a bit. But this weekend, he seemed to be back at his best. That qualifying lap he put together was spectacular, I must say. Gotta give credit where credit is due. People always say it's just a car when it comes to Lando, but it's all skill when Oscar puts it on pole. Personally, I'm more than happy to give a driver their flowers if they do well. Even though I nearly smashed my TV when he took pole away from Charles. I also thought he was going straight onto the start after that huge lockup, but other than that, there wasn't any action up front since the McLaren was simply too good for the Ferrari. Nevertheless, Lando was exceptional and is now just 3 points behind his teammate in the championship. Then the next question people typically ask, is this the turning point? Well, it definitely is a turning point, but the season is still so long that there will definitely be more pivotal moments between now and Abu Dhabi. Regardless, Lando needed this win for his confidence because things were starting to look shaky for him. Everybody talking about him not having the mentality to fight for a championship. Doubt starting to creep in and affect his driving. Sometimes I feel as though Norris can be his own worst enemy. But this weekend, he was zoned in. Let's see if he can keep it up. Him and Oscar have been very closely matched so far this season. And with the flexi-wing directive coming into effect for the next race in Barcelona, we will finally know who's going to be hit the hardest. Well, that's assuming if anyone's going to be affected at all. Because I'm so tired of hearing all the rumours that McLaren will be completely nerfed. What if they end up further ahead than they already are? One thing I am expecting this weekend though is a Red Bull comeback, as it suits their car better than Monaco did. Verstappen got the most he could out of the Red Bull, given the circumstances. The funniest part of that race as well was when he started talking about how his gear shifts felt like the Monaco Grand Prix in 1972.
It's a bit of a weird analogy.
Bro wasn't even born yet, and he's making references to a race that happened 53 years ago. This race was pretty much damage limitation, but I'm expecting him to be in the fight for pole and the win in Barcelona. That circuit in previous years has really suited their car very well. And I know I sound like a broken record, but it's a front limited circuit, so I wouldn't be surprised if they had the fastest car. But it also depends on how well the RB21 treats its tyres in handling the very high temperatures that are forecast for the weekend. Typically they've been pretty bad, which is not a good sign, but Imola provided a glimmer of hope for them. If Max ends up in free air, he can control the pace and manage the tyres despite the high temperatures. And given he's within striking range of both McLarens in the Drivers' Championship, it could be a great opportunity to do some damage. His teammate Tsunoda continues to struggle. To be fair, he did have older spec components compared to Max in Monaco, but there was still lap time left on the table in qualifying, which didn't help his race. I really don't know what to think about this Red Bull second seat anymore, because Horner has openly come out and said that they're solely focused on winning the Drivers' Championship. So what's the point of Yuki then? Just to be a hype man? Some Max fans were begging him to cause a red flag by doing a Singapore 2008 crash game and rig the race, which is wild, because Red Bull just would have been disqualified for that. But so far, he's shown very little indication of getting anywhere close to Max's pace. Of course, it's not easy. since there is no driver car combination on the grid with better chemistry than Verstappen in a Red Bull. But the gap between him and Max is too big for him to be even remotely competitive among the top 5 teams. Being so far off is why he finds himself battling in the midfield so much, similar to Perez. Then again, Yuki just seems like a placeholder for Red Bull to use as a tactical pawn for Max, which is peak because he was performing so well in the VCARB. But I guess that's what he signed up for when joining this team. Monaco wasn't his best performance in the world, but fingers crossed he'll be better for Spain. Mercedes actually had a mare. Not only did their former driver lap them in a Ferrari, but they also spent the majority of their race staring behind a Williams. That Williams strategy was actually some next level rage bait. Imagine being the most dominant force in Formula 1. Being untouchable for years on end, only to produce a car that breaks your drivers' backs in 2022, to then being slower than 2 customer teams in 2023 with McLaren and Aston Martin, to now being overtaken by Williams, a former backmarker team that has now managed to somehow outdevelop their engine suppliers. Well and truly a dark day for Toto Wolff. This shot of him from the race summed it up perfectly. It didn't help that Kimi crashed in qualifying, and Russell's engine gave up, leaving them starting in 14th and 15th. From there, they just got trolled by Williams all race long. Sainz was backing up to allow Albon to make both his stops, and then Alex returned the favour after, frustrating George so much to the point where he was just like screw it and cut the chicane. He was then informed about being handed a drive-through penalty, to which he replied, "I prefer not to speak. Bro is not Jose Mourinho." And Kimi tried the same, but decided to give the position back instead of trying to build a gap. Teams and drivers will always exploit any grey area they can in order to gain an advantage. But this was just next level Mickey Mouse gimmicks. I mean, Antonelli almost ran into the back of Albon at some point because he was driving so slow. Mercedes also just forgot to stop their drivers right until the very end, meaning Antonelli ended up dead last. What was their strategy department even doing? I don't know. It's crazy how during the opening few races, most people were convinced that Russell would be a title contender given his consistency. But it's clear now that Mercedes still have many flaws with their car, reliability, tyre management, and more. VCARB also employed similar tactics to Williams, with Lawson holding up the pack. Hadjar was able to make his 2 pit stops in quick succession and still maintain position. And credit to Liam for doing a brilliant job in creating that gap before making his own stops on lap 31 and 40. Hadjar's incredible Q3 lap enabled him to start P5 and he ended up P6. Lawson also did great, coming home in P8. It was a beautiful day for Visa Cash App Racing Bull fans, but at the expense of pretty much everyone else. Same with Williams. Aston Martin looked very good with Alonso. He was on to score points, but then his engine just exploded, meaning he still has 0 points in 2025. Man really has no luck at all. Stroll was just all over throughout the weekend, but he did make this clean overtake on Hülkenberg on the final lap. Behrman's race was over before it even started since he got a 10th-place grid penalty. Ocon had an amazing performance though to finish in P7. Bortoleto got sent into the barrier on lap 1 and Hülkenberg couldn't do much in the other kick. And Alpine, well, they said it's their day off. Every year, we seem to have the same old conversations. Has F1 outgrown Monaco? It's never going to produce the most exciting racing. But maybe we should just come to accept that it's okay to have one race weekend out of the year that's more about Saturday than it is about Sunday. This track has always been about testing the drivers, maintaining peak concentration, getting as close to the barriers as you dare, and pushing the limits of what is possible. Sure, the race is rarely going to be interesting. Most people's time would be better spent reading the race result and then maybe watching the highlights after if it was genuinely good. But for many drivers, it has provided such special moments and carries a lot of history. It's understandable why it stayed on the calendar for this long. But now it's out of the way, the sport is about to enter a very interesting phase of the season. One that is crucial for Verstappen and Red Bull's championship hopes. One that is significant for Norris and Piastri in their fight for the driver's title. This is the point of the season where last year, multiple different drivers and teams were capable of fighting for wins. Ferrari need a few more upgrades before they're consistently in contention with the top 2 teams, but having Hamilton and Leclerc in the fight up front would make things 10 times more interesting. It'll be exciting to see what happens in Spain, but until then, I hope you all enjoyed. If you did, please drop a like, share this video around with friends, and subscribe to the channel if you're new to get my latest videos in the future. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.